Emmanuel Macron says France will provide Ukraine with French-made fighter jets. The French president says the planes will arrive by the end of the year. The Mirage 2000 fighter jet entered service in the late 1990s and was considered one of the best combat aircraft of that era. France would also start training Ukrainian pilots as part of the plans. The question of Western aid and training for Ukraine remains a testy subject, however, for both Russia and NATO.
They've already been working together in neighboring Poland. These images show Ukrainian recruits being trained by French and other NATO instructors in April. Ukraine has long wanted such training inside Ukraine, now for some 150,000 fresh recruits. Brigade by brigade, they can then be deployed to front lines within hours, if needed, rather than days or weeks. But NATO boots on the ground, even those of instructors, dramatically raise the stakes, potentially drawing the United States and Europe more directly into the war. Russia was quick to respond to the idea, first leaked to French media.
Regardless of whether they are members of the French armed forces or simply mercenaries, they represent an absolutely legitimate target for our armed forces.
It's not the first time Russia has talked tough about ever more threatening Western military aid to Ukraine. And it's not the first time the West has changed its mind about such aid, especially in the last year, and more so after Moscow started claiming more victories in recent months. Western allies crossed their own previous red lines with, for example, U.S. HIMARS mobile rocket launchers. Germany, the UK, and the U.S. agreed to send heavy-duty tanks. The U.S. gave the green light to countries wanting to send U.S.-made fighter jets. And then, quietly, Joe Biden turned 180 degrees and told Ukraine it can hit targets inside Russia with U.S.-made missiles. NATO's chief was already on board.
The time has come to consider whether it will be right to lift some of the restrictions which have been imposed.
Lifting restrictions like putting NATO military personnel, including military instructors, in harm's way inside Ukraine.
All right, let's get more from DW correspondent Armian Isif in Kyiv. Armian, good to see you. How and where would France train Ukrainian soldiers?
Well, we don't know. There's confusion about this at this moment because when Macron announced the shipment of the Mirage jets, the approval of the shipment of the Mirage jets, he said that the pilots, the Ukrainian pilots, would be trained in France. Now, this contradicts reports that emerged just over a week ago saying that Macron had been in talks with Ukraine to train fighter pilots in Ukraine. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces here even said he'd already signed off on the paperwork allowing those trainers into Ukraine. Now, this was followed by threats from Russia that these would be legitimate military targets. And now it sounds like Macron is saying that the next batch of Ukrainian fighter pilots will be trained outside of Ukrainian borders, as has previously been done. But don't forget that there already are NATO personnel in Ukraine. France, UK, and the US all have military personnel in the country in advisory roles. France and the United Kingdom have advisors helping the military already in Ukraine, and the U.S. has military personnel overseeing the shipment of American weapons. So this wouldn't be anything new, but a mass of French pilot trainers coming into the country would be something that Russia might see as escalatory.
Is France seen as a strong ally by Ukrainians?
This is changing. At the very beginning of the war, he had the reputation of being one of Ukraine's most hated friends. There was a verb that was coined by Ukrainian military here called Macroning, which means to look very worried, to make sure everybody knows you're very worried about an issue and then do nothing about it. He was one of the few leaders of a NATO country that open dialogue with Russia after the full-scale invasions. He had several phone calls with Vladimir Putin after he invaded Ukraine in February 2022. This came as a Ukrainians did not see this in a good light at the beginning of the war, but it seems that he's reversed course, now even becoming the taboo breaker among NATO countries, suggesting even at the beginning of May that France could send its own ground troops into Ukraine if Russia crossed a red line.
Ukrainians are currently pushing back against increased Russian attacks, especially in the area around Kyiv. Do they think that any of these initiatives from France will help them now?
They do. There's a lot of hope that a big shipment of fighter jets, along with training of fighter pilots, could turn the tide here. Russia has vast air superiority in Ukraine, which is a big deal for the Ukrainian front lines. They really can't move without being threatened by Russian missiles and Russian fighter jets, and they believe that any help on that end will help turn the tide in their favor. But don't forget, this won't be a silver bullet. Even military analysts are saying that now. That's because F-16s and Mirage fighter jets, they're a huge upgrade to Soviet-era jets. They're like computers in the sky. They can be used as missile launchers, hitting targets from miles, hundreds of miles away without being detected. But as we've seen with the shipment of Abrams tanks from the US and the Leopards from Germany, these advanced weapons don't necessarily act as silver bullets. What Ukraine needs is a lot of weapons, not a few precision weapons.
Amian Isif in Kyiv. Thanks very much for that.
We can talk now to military expert Marina Miron, who's with the War Studies Department at King's College London. Welcome, Marina. Ukraine has been asking for fighter jets for well over a year now. It looks like they're finally getting them, so this must be a really good day for Kyiv.
Hello, Anya. Well, absolutely. Ukraine has been asking a lot for the fighter jets, and there have been some significant delays when it comes to the delivery of F-16s due to many problems associated with pilot training, with getting the logistics right, creating hangars, training ground crews, and so on. But it looks promising as Ukraine is getting 80 F-16s. It remains, however, be seen how vulnerable this will be to Russian ground-based air defenses and how Ukraine is planning to integrate them into their overall operational design.
Okay. As we're saying, it's going to be almost half a year until Ukraine can actually use these jets in battle. And we're, of course, getting daily reports of Russia ramping up its attacks. So, in general, is this too little too late?
Well, I think the problem is that it was a very difficult logistical operation to get those jets to Ukraine, to prepare the maintenance crews, to establish the logistical lines, and so on. And so what Russia will be doing, certainly, is using their intelligence assets in order to locate where the storage facilities are, where the jets are stationed, and they will try to destroy as many jets as they can before these jets can take off. So it remains to be seen how this is going to play out and whether Ukraine can essentially protect its own fleet of F-16s, because Ukraine is also lacking air defense systems.
Mm-hmm. When the time comes, though, for them to be used, they could, of course, be used to hit targets inside Russia. So how do you expect Ukraine to use them to attack or to defend?
Well, we have to understand that these jets will be capable of launching air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles. What I think will be the Ukrainian approach, given the fact that the Russians have been warned well in advance, and the fact that the Russians are using their electronic warfare and air defense systems in a synchronized way for air targets. It will be a great danger for the F-16s and also for the French Mirage jets if and when they arrive. So for the Ukrainian armed forces, it will be more about denying the air superiority to the Russian Air Force and possibly preventing the Russians from launching their fabs, which have been quite a significant damaging factor throughout the past months of the war.
The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has said that France could be training Ukrainian pilots in Ukraine. So just to clarify, does this mean that French soldiers will be on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, essentially, yes. It means that French instructors should be on the ground in Ukraine in order to train Ukrainian pilots. And President Macron has already hinted at that a couple of times, and until Putin has threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons. But I think at this stage, the problem here is how will France respond if Russia targets those French instructors, even if they're not actively taking part in combat operations.
Marina, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for that analysis. That's Marina Maron from King's College London. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.